Okay, my focus today will be on the economics of climate change. I will need to look at the understanding the costs, the risk, and the trade-offs. The content will be an introduction. Then after that, we'll look at the cost of climate change. Then we'll push further and look at responding to climate change, the key economic debates behind the economics of climate change. I will look at the opportunities and differentiation, then the economics of climate change, its relevance to Africa as a continent. Then we end with a conclusion. An introduction. What is climate change? Climate change is a long-term change in temperature and weather patterns driven largely by anthropogenic activities, which causes the emission of greenhouse gases. And we actually have the fluorinated gases, we have nitrogen oxide, we have methane and carbon dioxide. Why does climate change matter economically? It affects production, consumption, and technically the wealth distribution of a society. So climate change in its right is more economic than it used to be in our present terrain right now. What is the economics of climate change? The economics of climate change looks at the causes and impacts. We look at the drivers and the consequences of this climate change on the economies of various countries, be it in Africa, be it in Europe, or be it in Asia. Then what decision do we make under the uncertainty and scarcity of climate change is quite a key factor, because one of the fundamental constraints or challenges of economics is the limited resources we have. Then we look at the cost and benefits of actions or inaction based on the time factor at which climate change occurs. Climate change as a market failure. Greenhouse gas emission actually causes negative externality, which in its right, we don't know who has to pay for this in the future. So when we talk about sustainability, we are talking about the market failure of climate change impact. And when we look at the negative externality, we are looking at the overproduction of pollution, be it airborne pollution, be it health hazards, and also the underinvestment in sustainability, which is actually a very key factor. Looking at Adam Smith's philosophy of the invisible hand and the impact capitalism has caused the society, who is going to bond the cost for climate change is quite a fundamental or philosophical issue to us. So the climate change as a phenomenon is actually a sort of a market failure, because who's going to bond the future impact of climate change? The Stern Review Insights, Professor Nicholas Stern, which was a professor in London School of Economics, actually had a review and made an emphasis on climate change being a market failure. So climate change is identified as the largest market failure in history. What is the cost of early action? It will cost us approximately 1 to 2% of our global GDP. And if we don't act very fast, potentially it's going to cost us probably 5 to 20% of the global GDP. So we need to act as fast as possible. What is the cost of climate change? We actually have two major costs of climate change, which is sort of the direct and indirect costs. The direct cost is sort of more related to the physical risk, which is comes from both the acute and chronic parts, which is more flooding, droughts, extreme weather events, and change in precipitation level, which could cause infrastructure damages. And what are the indirect costs? The indirect cost is more the cost to the economy, which could be the health impact on the population based on environmental and air pollution. Also, it could actually cause a reduction in agricultural outputs and supply chain disruption, which could actually affect or have a major impact on the GDP of nations. So what are the economic impacts by sector? Just like as I've emphasized, agriculture could probably yield lower crops. It could be, cause an increase in food insecurity. Finance could be affected based on investment decisions, because climate-prone economies will actually have a higher risk in terms of doing businesses. The energy sector, the transition costs could be enormous, and there will be a risk of stranded fossil fuel, especially for economies that are actually sort of dependent on fossil fuel production. Then the insurance sector will be affected enormously, especially maybe coastal regions that actually have sort of house are situated along the coastal regions. They could actually lead to increase in premium payments due to extreme weather events. What are the responses to climate change? We actually have two major responses to climate change, which could be linked to the ideas of the climate finance, which are the mitigation and adaptation side of climate change. What's the mitigation? Since we are transitioning to a renewable energy source, we need to reduce CO2 emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to implement things like carbon taxes and emission controls, which could be the cap and trade policies. Then we need to adapt towards climate resilient facilities. Our infrastructure should withstand climate effects. Then we should expand irrigation and resilient agricultural practices, which could be actually a way to adapt to climate change. What are the policy tools in climate economics? We actually have carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is actually a market-based instrument which could include carbon taxes and cap and trade systems. And what are cap and trade systems? Cap and trade systems are sort of a trading systems to actually cap emissions, and we could trade excess emissions for those that actually have less emissions. They will actually have subsidies for green energy. Companies that are actually into the green energy production or transitioning into renewable energy sources could actually enjoy sort of lower loan interest in terms of actually running their business venture. Regulation and standards. There could be regulations such as the nationally determined contributions or standards to actually reduce or limit emissions. Public investments. The public investments, it could be a major influence on maintaining or reducing or limiting climate impact or greenhouse gas emissions. Key economic debates, discounting and future generations, and we should be able to actually look at the impact of climate change in the future. There's something Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor, calls it is the tragedy of the horizons, which is sort of the time impact in which climate change is going to occur. So we need to actually discount the future based on a higher discount rate in terms of being a sustainable form of investment in the future, so that we can be able to actually limit our greenhouse gas emissions in order to save the future generation. Equity and climate justice. The equity and climate justice is sort of an entwined idea, because we are actually emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, and who are the major emitters? These are the advanced countries. They actually emit so much greenhouse gases, and the impact is highly felt in the lower developed or the less developed countries, which are actually sort of more exposed due to their geographical location to the climate impact. What are the opportunities and differentiation? So opportunities in climate action could lead to like increments in green jobs. There's something Schumpeter calls creative destruction. And creative destruction is when an industry actually closes, there's actually a new industry that forms out of it. So the renewable energy sector could create a lot of new jobs, new markets, innovation and technology. So it could actually spur a different level of revolution in terms of moving to or transitioning into a green economy. So what's the key differentiation between climate economics, finance, and accounting? The focus, climate economics focuses more on decision making and incentives, and why do we even make this decision? And the key question is more of the why. Why are these decisions made? Why do we make a decision to move to the next level, to probably move to a green economy? Why climate finance focuses more of funding? It's more of how do we fund this climate transition or this mitigation and adaptation controls. So the funding mechanism, whether it's public or private, how do we get this capital? So it focuses on how are these projects funded. While climate accounting is more on the measurement and reporting, which is one of the tenets of accounting profession. Why the key question is what is measured and reported. So relevance to Africa. Africa's climate economic contents. Africa is more prone to climate change, first of all, because of its focus or its more indulgence in agricultural sector. The bulk of its population is more involved in agriculture. Secondly, its location geographically makes it more exposed to things like flood, drought, and also the less capital. They actually do not have enough capital, which makes it sort of in a dire strait in terms of funding. So they'll probably need capital in order to transition or in order to actually physically protect them or make them resilient to climate impact. What's the conclusion? The core nature of the problem is climate change is fundamentally an economic problem requiring economic solutions. We've mentioned about the negative externality. How do we price the impact of climate change for the future generation? Is climate change a market's failure? Who takes care of the responsibility for this market's failure? So these are quite the questions we are asking of fundamental philosophies behind the economics of climate change. What's the market correction? Is it carbon trading? Is it carbon cap and trade policies? How do we protect the future generation, or the course of action and inaction? So how are these actually infused into economic policies? And case for early action, do we need to act fast? As Mark Carney says, the tragedy of the horizons, we need to actually act fast in order to reduce the impact of climate change for the future generation.